The HX Collective explores the human experience through three main channels of life: work, relationships, and self. With raw, authentic conversations, the podcast investigates how challenges can become powerful teachers, leading to personal growth and deeper connections. Rooted in humanity centered design, each episode reflects a commitment to doing good and doing well, featuring diverse voices and generational perspectives. Expect gripping stories of struggle and success with thought provoking discussions and concrete tools and tactics that encourage you to rethink your relationship with distress, helping you to establish your full human experience. This is the HX Collective channel. Hello, friends, and welcome to the next episode of the HX Collective podcast. When I tell you you are in for a treat of a conversation today, true words have never been spoken. I am so thrilled to pick up a conversation with Kat Miller, the founder of This Way Up. And when you get to know her, I am confident that all of you are going to want to scroll very quickly to the show notes so that you can gain access to this amazing community and website and resourcing that she has done through This Way Up in destigmatizing mental health in a way that makes us all accessible for elevated human flourishing. So, Kat, welcome. I am thrilled to one, know you. Let's just start there. And secondly, the fact that we get to have this podcast conversation, knowing that podcast is a big part of This Way Up, it's always such a delight to be able to bring someone in as our guest who really understands the power of this medium and how valuable it can be to really create action and resourcing for people. So, by way of getting started, I'll set the stage, but then I'd love for you to tell a bit more of our audience just to give us a sense of context. But, friends, when you know in your life, when there are people in the world that you are just absolutely intended to meet, I have to say, Kat Miller is one of those people. So, when we launched the HX Collective, the mission was always about elevating human flourishing. It was always about how do we bring resources to the lens of work, relationships, and self. And how do we do that in a way that has this undercurrent of making the subject of well being and the subject of mental health a natural part or extension, like we would talk about any element of physical or spiritual or emotional positive outcomes and well being. Now, friends, you know that over the course of the last few years, and if you follow the HX Collective, you know that a big part of the inspiration for this community was my own personal journey in being in a situation where I had a child struggling with adolescent mental health. Felt largely ill equipped to be prepared to have this conversation and engage with my daughter as she was going through the journey. And I felt very isolated and very alone in that journey and believing that I didn't know how to access information and resources. So now we fast forward many years ahead. And one of the dreams that I had would be that there would be a place, a space, a collective, if you will, that would bring access to information and good information, not weird people's opinion kind of information, but actually data backed, science backed research and information to bring it together in a way that would be actionable and resourced. And lo and behold, several months ago, a very good friend of mine and Kat's did the matchmaking. She said, "You've absolutely got to meet this woman who has launched an entire resource and community through This Way Up. You got to know Kat Miller." And when I tell you that I got to know Kat Miller through my first engagement was through her website, it was like the answer to a solution that I had been dreaming of. And here she is. She's already created it. So, Kat, with that very long and extended setup and introduction, please take a minute and love our audience to get to know you, get to know a bit of your background and backstory, and to really understand what is This Way Up.
Deb, it's amazing to be with you. And I think this is the second time I'm going to say to you in our short time of knowing each other that is like the best introduction I've ever.
Deserved. All of it is deserved.
And in addition, I feel like there were like just in that brief moment, I feel like there are 10 different things we could launch into and discuss for hours, which is one of the reasons we connect so much and support each other's efforts so much. Should I kind of dive into my story and what led to creating This Way Up?
Well, you know what? I actually want to before we do that, actually, I've not done a great job of describing what This Way Up is. So let's start with what it is that you've created, and then let's go to the backstory because I'm doing a disservice when I'm like, "Oh, it's this great website and it's got resources." Like, how would you position what is this way up? And then let's talk about the journey that got you there.
Perfect. So I think, in many ways, this way up is incredibly simple, but I think that's part of the magic. Simply, we want to fight stigma. As you know, there's so many studies that show like if you fight stigma, it increases, at least in the short term, it increases help seeking behavior. And that's what we want. Like if people are struggling, we want them to have a little extra boost maybe to be able to ask for help. And then in addition, like you and I, through lots of searching, through all of our resources, we could probably list, actually, I know I can list like 50 things that I could do to help my well being, but not everyone has access to those resources. And so this way up also has direct from the expert videos and articles, wide array of things, because unfortunately everybody kind of has to find their own journey and what works for them. But so there's about exercise, meditation, mindfulness, anti-inflammatory foods, etc. But so all these free resources. So the goal is if you're struggling, we don't want you to feel alone. We want you to feel confident to ask for help. And we want you to have tools to maybe bring a bright day just a little bit closer.
I love it. So you had me at the concept of help seeking behaviors because I do believe when we feel like there is a place, there is an aggregation of things that can be useful. I just think the range of things that you've brought all under one umbrella, like the ease of access, does, I'm sure, inspire that help seeking willingness and engagement. So let's start with the backstory because I think the origin of the why you've created this is so compelling and it's so relatable. So let's begin wherever you will in your background and backstory.
All right, fabulous. So was about 2007, let's say, and I probably erroneously defined myself as a finance career woman, but I was working my butt off. I was in investment banking for almost 10 years, married to a man I met at Harvard Business School who was also in finance. We had tons of friends, very much like work hard, play hard, amazing life. And we decided it was time to start a family. And when I became a new mom, I was literally smacked in the face with like a change in identity, which in and of itself can be a huge thing. A hormonal shift, which can also be huge. Diagnosis of an autoimmune disease. And then kind of further complicated by I'd had multiple concussions, horseback riding, and a family history of some mental health issues. And so suddenly I I didn't know who I was. I felt nothing like myself. I had no motivation to do anything. I felt nothing. I was completely numb. And I had a new baby, and so I never thought about self-harm, but the number of times that I certainly thought, if I went to sleep and didn't wake up, that really wouldn't be so bad. But for me, and I think likely because of like unconscious internal stigma, even with those thoughts, I didn't realize I was depressed. It wasn't until like I had convinced myself that it was a physical ailment that was impacting me. So I made an appointment with the GI doctor because I was going to have him confirm, what I figured out that was physically wrong with me. And this poor man looks at me and he says, "Yeah, no, the symptoms you're describing it's not a GI issue." And I had tears come to my eyes because I so desperately wanted an answer to stop feeling the way that I was feeling. And he was worse. He's like, "So what am I missing?" And I told him, I was like, I feel like crap. I am completely lethargic and unmotivated. I don't feel like myself." And he said, "Is there any chance that this is mental?" And in my head, I was thinking, "You blank and blank and blank and blank. How dare you suggest that what I'm feeling physically could be mental?" But of course, he was dead right. It took me, he had to introduce that idea to me, which is bizarre. But so finally, I realized I was depressed. And I became, or probably a lot, we figure things out. We're problem solvers, right? So I was like, okay, I'm gonna fix this. And so I started researching everything I could. I became like a self proclaimed mental health biohacker. There's not anything out there loosely associated with well-being that I probably haven't tried. But like during my self-experimentation phase, we also learned that my daughter was struggling with anxiety. And that was really the first time I started thinking, in addition to fighting for my own mental health on a daily basis, maybe I could do something else so that other people who are struggling with this just don't feel alone and feel like there's a path to feeling better and having hope about that. And so that's what led to the creation of this way up.
So, first of all, I can only imagine that feeling of like, I shouldn't be feeling this way. So, there's got to be a plausible answer that's anything other than mental. And so, it's like we don't even give ourselves permission to even contemplate that, largely because there's something attached to that that feels shameful. It's like, what? This is a brain thing? Like, what? I'm smarter than this. I'm more accomplished than this. Surely there's got to be a way around that. So, kudos to you to one, give yourself permission to explore and investigate, and then come to that place of surrender and say, you know what, there's a thing here. How from that place of surrender, what hope has been born out of that when you think about the creation of this way up and just the journey that you're on now?
Yeah, and to your point too about the self-recognition, I think the other thing, and maybe this is part of why my story resonates, is that like I had a perfect life, right? There was nothing wrong with my life. It was amazing. And yet, even under that circumstance, like that's mental health can get you no matter where you are. And so, I don't know if that's a piece of it too. And maybe that's part of my own disbelief. I was like, well, why don't you feel great? You have every reason to feel great. But I didn't. All right. So you were asking about hope. It's been we just launched the website the end of July. So we're actually, we're still doing as much as we can to talk to our users in our community and learn about what's most impactful and how we can make more impact, make it more fulfilling resource. But, in addition, we've done like some community events and workshops. And I mean, I just adore like after so at these events, like I would share my story because I think it's just part of the authentic communication again, and then allowing other people to feel vulnerable and open and communicative. But then afterwards, women who would have been strangers prior to this come up to me and say, I was really struggling when I was younger. And like with tears in her eyes, she's like, I really wish I'd had a resource like this that had been available, which is just incredibly touching. And then another woman who sort of said thank you and started telling me her own struggles, like, but just sharing that authentically enables people to get to be vulnerable themselves, to feel stronger about being vulnerable. And this woman was actually going to use some of our resources with a group at work as well, like to go through and like help her team, which is so just seeing the positives, especially among all the negatives that are available to look at if we choose to. Seeing those positives is incredible.
I love it. So I'm inclined to interject two things. First, the thing that everyone should know, this again, all of this will be located in the show notes of our conversation. You can find this website at www.thiswayup.life, Life. So have that on your radar, set that to favorites. I promise you that will be just a comfort space. It will be the blanket that you can consistently reference, that moment and space for inspiration. I want to make sure that folks have that early in our dialogue to know exactly what you're describing. I think the second thing though, and the power of being able to have, I mean, at the essence of human flourishing, at the essence of the human experience is the word authentic. It's this idea of being our most raw and our most vulnerable space, not because we're coming from a place of weakness or burden, but because it's in that space that power, and in the true sense, like where the lifting up actually can happen. So, if I shift gears now, we talk a bit about what you've witnessed in this process and in thinking about, that this even the naming of this way up. Talk to us a little bit about that and some of the additional observations that you've had when you've started to see human beings connect with your work or connect with you personally at that very deep and authentic space.
I of course we connect about this too, but I feel like just more recently over the past few years of my life, like understanding the true value of authenticity, and that I've learned that unless I bring my authentic self to a conversation, to a moment of social connection, I don't get that authentic bond, right? There's so many times we want to protect ourselves, understandably, by having boundaries, or we have a vision we want to project in a certain moment, and that makes sense. But if you really want to connect with somebody, you need to let your authentic self come through in order to actually have that connection. And so you were asking about learnings about the website, yeah? Or was it
Or just even just the concept of, I think at least I'll speak for my own journey, like, my first response, kindred to what you've described thus far, is that, that in that space of vulnerability that I perceive that to be a place of weakness and burden. And when you think about the construct of lifting and you think about this idea of this way up, that this isn't the space of pain or brokenness or burden that's permanent, that there's light and there's a way out. And we always say at the HX Collective, the human flourishing does not happen as a solo sport. It is a community based experience. And so maybe just say a little bit about even just the positioning of this as this way up, the inspiration that comes from that, and then we'll talk a little bit about, like, what's been happening already in just since you've launched in July.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we want to be there for women regardless, like bring your authentic self and it's okay, because there are going to be some days where you don't feel like it's okay. And that's okay too. Like we're still there to support you, and at least knowing that, at least knowing it's okay to be okay and there's someone there, hopefully that helps a tiny bit. But exactly what we said, it can be a roller coaster, right? And so the more we can do to just elevate the number of good days that you have, and maybe, increase the virtuous cycle of some well-being, some flourishing habits that then, enable you to rise up even more, that would be our goal.
Yeah, I love it. I remember, at a particularly low point, I used the analogy with one of my best girlfriends that I felt like I was Andy Dufresne from Shawshank Redemption. And spoiler alert, the movie's been out for a while, so I'm just gonna lay it all out there for you. So if you haven't seen the movie, my regrets that I may be spoiling it, but there's a particular point where the character of Andy Dufresne in the Shawshank Redemption, this is a man who'd been wrongly imprisoned for the murder of his wife. He decides that he is going to tunnel his way out of this prison to get to an edge of freedom. And there is that moment in the movie where he's in the tunnel and he is army crawling through multiple football fields of raw sewage. And that space of, like, there is only one way out. There isn't a going back. There's just you have to keep moving. And I think a lot of the journey that leads us to that space of surrender is the realization. I always, though, remember my closest girlfriend said, "But Deb, the differences from Andy Dufresne is that you don't have to walk that tunnel alone. You don't have to be in the raw sewage alone." She's like, "'Cause there's 2 things. Sometimes you need to go through it, and that's what you need to do." So she's like, "Do you want me to jump in there with you, or do you want me to pull you out?" And when I first got introduced to the name of This Way Up, I could hear her voice saying, "You want me to jump in? Or do you want me to do you want me to pull you out?" And I think that there is some framing around the work that you're doing that operates in that same space. Do you want me to get in there with you? And let's do the Shawshank tunnel crawl through the sewage? Or are you looking for a lift out? And so with that frame in mind, tell us a little bit about the resourcing and kind of what has been most inspiring to you so far as you think about how people have been engaging the work and the comments and the feedback. Tell us a bit more about how that's going so far.
Yeah, I mean, I love that analogy.
Borrow it. It's
Oh
yours.
my God. And that
Have an
girlfriend.
she's amazing. She is.
That's amazing. I mean, as you're pointing out, and we all know, but community is vital, right? It's so important. And it's become such a whole in our society for all the reasons we know. But there are so many different studies that show that even people living in neighborhoods with more social cohesion have lower rates of depression, anxiety, and psychological distress. There's a University of Chicago super agers study where they're looking at 80-plus-year-olds who have cognitive abilities of someone 50 or younger and trying to figure out why are they so healthy. And the factor that came up the earliest and strongest was social connection. Right. So it's not just about mental well-being, but longevity. It makes such a difference. And so that community aspect, we have so on the website, there are like I tell my story, but more importantly, like there are just other members of the community who are sharing different moments from their lives when they've struggled or when they've recovered, or it's just different lenses so that, hopefully if someone goes and they're struggling, like a story resonates with them, they find something that's like, aha, like I'm not alone. And then in addition, like social media will ask for comments and inputs and like tell us things that might be working for you or that you might be struggling with. And the community is actually, again, we just launched in July, but it's a key piece that we want to even improve and strengthen going forward next year with some additional like in-person events and some virtual events and potentially looking for like ambassadors within certain cities to maybe volunteer to represent helping us to host an event, so something for listeners to keep in mind if they're interested.
I love it. I am so glad you talk about the community building because it is amazing to me that how much the human experience is the great unifier, and that no matter what the surrounding circumstances are, no matter how affluent, how educated, how resourced you are, as you said, the mental health and the human experience is it's equal. There's no discrimination one direction or another. Where the opportunity though I comes and where I think there is a disparate nature is how many means do you have to be resourced? And when you have a community like you're building, it just builds that kind of equity towards access and hearing and you can see yourself in other people's stories and the power in that can be activated. I also love, and you're highlighting this, let's talk about the research pieces because one of the standards I know that you all have given yourselves based on what gets included is the validated data and research backed validity of things. So it's not just, kind of pseudoscience. There is a certain element of bringing what sometimes might be hard for people to find in the world of academia or in the world of the, NIH or wherever, and that ability to also make those things pretty accessible. Talk to us a little bit about that when it comes to the quality of what is being accessible through this way up.
Yeah, thank you so much for mentioning that. So before we started, we really tried to like the competitive landscape analysis. Like we wanted to find the gaps that were out there and solutions for people so that we could be adding the most value and the most impact. And like with some polling, it was, people were asking, they're like, there's a lot out there about mental health that I don't know what to trust. And so like we realized like absolutely we have to let our community know that anything that we post is going to be expert and science backed. So we've got This Way Up has a board of scientific advisors. We've got 5 different scientific advisors. So all of the content is reviewed by them, and in many cases is actually from our panel of scientific advisors who all have amazing biographies, and so yes, but that's a key component. We don't want anyone to doubt the validity of any of the data.
Well, and I think to that end, so the fact that that is already embedded into the access of resources, again, the trust and confidence is so great. Then you layer in the community building. You bring in sort of the lived experience. And, as you reflect over the stories that you've heard that have been told so far and the people that are willingly raising their hands saying, I want to add something to for the benefit of this community. I want to tell my story. What would you say has surprised you the most so far?
Even though like the whole hypothesis around this is that it would resonate with people, it still surprises me when it does. Like I guess it touches me more than surprises me. But to actually feel like that this resonates so much with someone that then they're willing to put their own story out in public on the internet. Like it really is important. People feel that.
Yeah, I know, and just the trust and confidence that they can do that in your space. I do find that to be super inspiring and just in and of itself. You mentioned, and we could clearly do an entire next conversation about the dynamic of being a parent of a child who's struggling with anxiety or a child who's struggling with depression. And while we both our daughter's experiences are theirs and their stories are to tell. I would be really encouraging or would want, for people who may hear our conversation today and maybe they aren't struggling. Maybe for them right now, it isn't a sense of their own mental health conditions, but it's the mental experience of a loved one, whether it's a child or a sibling or even a good friend. When you are in a relationship and someone you love is struggling, how is this way up? How might we access information in a way that can also inform not only our own journey, but the journey of those that we love so dearly?
Yeah. I mean, yes, a topic near and dear to both of our hearts. So first, I'm going to have to use the airplane analogy, right? Like if the oxygen masks come down, you got to put yours on first before you help the person beside you. I think it's similar with flourishing and well-being. You know, step one is being sure that you are in a decent space in order to be helpful. You've got to take care of yourself as well. And so those, for that and that piece as like resources are on this way up. And then we actually had my This Way Up team had a strategic planning meeting yesterday. And one of because we were trying to strategically think about, we have a lot of video content on the website, but we certainly don't cover, an infinite number of topics. And one of the ones we were talking specifically about adding was this exactly to your point about, if you're a parent of someone who's struggling, some more specific tools that might be helpful in that regard. And so let's definitely follow up about that one.
I would. Okay, great. Because I do think, again, having my own individual journey and then having to figure out, like, how do I show up in the space of caring for a child that is clearly struggling. I will out myself and say that my self-talk and my parenting talk, and really probably my friend talk and my colleague talk and my coworker talk and my client talk, I do trend to trying to talk people out of their bad feelings. I have, the toxic positivity, like, if I have an Achilles heel, I think that is and a lot of that is starts with the toxic positivity to myself. Like, "Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, girl. You got a lot going for you. You got a lot of potential." Like, you almost try to use and I am all for positive affirmation. I mean, I think that's a great space, but there's a place where it can go over the edge, and I can say confidently when was first experiencing this in my relationship with my daughter, my first inclination was not to be curious. It was definitely to talk her out of it and try to help her remember who she was. And when that stopped working, there was a certain recognition of like, I got to look at myself first and then begin to see how do I equip myself so that I can be more equipping. There's a topic that is a through line that in that learning of how to change my mindset from trying to be toxically positive to the place of validation. I think validation is something that's really misunderstood. And what I love and where I knew immediately, like, we've got to be in each other's lives is that was an awakening for me that validation as a therapeutic construct doesn't mean that you have to agree that a person's behavior or response or like that you don't have to agree that that's like the right thing. But you have to agree that they're really struggling. And, as you think about any through lines of the content that is being promoted, or if you think about the constructs that seem to be most visited on the website, or is there any aspect that you can draw even preliminary analogies to that might be useful for folks that are listening that might be saying, wait a minute, that's a theme I'm interested in, or that's a concept I don't know a lot about. What would be some of the highlights or areas like I was saying that the website is sort of telling you like this is popular? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, and also I think, as you were talking about parenting someone who's struggling or, even if it's being a friend or someone who's struggling, I think we should give a shout out to Jen Mar, right? And her books showing up and her program and education and some of the wonderful work she's doing in that regard. If listeners don't know about her, wonderful resource. And then really like honestly, so at this point, like on the website, the personal videos, the community videos are what resonate more and get more clicks than the resources even. And the resources, it's across such a broad swath, but it's really the personal stories.
I love it. Well, it is exciting to know that what you're doing exists first and foremost. And I'm glad you gave Jen Mar, our shared friend, a shout out. There were two dreams that I had once I got to the space of surrender. And I'm like, okay, there's going to be no waste in the journey of this struggle. And there's going to be no waste in finding ways to, one, help people deal with people when they're struggling and then finding the resources. And so I had two dreams. One dream was I'm going to figure out how to train people and how to be with people when they're struggling. And I had this big research idea and I was going to go on a research mission. And somebody in my network was like, "Well, you should meet this book author. She might be a good person to interview for your research, Deb." And I spent 5 minutes talking to Jen Marr, and it was like, "What do you mean you've been 10 years doing all the research and teaching people how to navigate the awkward zone? And what do you mean you've got a full training curriculum to teach people how to show up for other people?" It was like this aspiration of research was done in a single conversation. And so, Kat, I'm glad you mentioned her, and I know she's knit into our lives for good reason. But I will tell you the second dream that I had in my desire to train people on how not to be injurious in their toxic positivity or injurious in their awkward zone related was the desire to be like, why is there not a single place that I could find all of these research? I mean, the deep, dark searching and researching and all this stuff. And there was no easy aggregate to bring it all together. And I thought, if I had enough wherewithal, I would be a person who would create the hub that would bring it all together so that it could be a single starting point that would make it so much easier for people then to go deeper in the resource that they need. And then our shared girlfriend, Margaret, was like, "You should meet my friend Kat Miller. She might have some interesting insight." And Kat, you too, you already did it. So it's like 2 dreams are fulfilled in what the world needs. And so when you think about the work and you think about the future, give us some additional things that you're aspiring to. And as you're continuing to be this like vital destination spot for people who may be wherever they are on the journey, what are some things in the future state we can look forward to?
So I think as we talked about community for sure, like I really want to, because it's so impactful and so important, thinking about, we have, it's actually, this made me teary eyed when we did a survey of our community. Of the people who responded, 100% said that they would be interested in attending event. And it was like 80% that said they would be interested in being an ambassador. So I was blown away. But so we will be doing some events and testing it out, looking for feedback in different cities. I think that will be amazing. We'll also be expanding the content that is available with new experts, very diverse, voices. And one thing it's clear to you and me, but just to be sure it's clear to your listeners, like everything we're talking about is completely free. Like I still will have calls with folks just like networking, trying to figure out how to help each other. And they'll like ask about my revenue or, what I want from a profit standpoint. I'm like, no, 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 no. I'm really, my goal is to make the most positive impact that we can to help the most people, which I think, you and I talking, all of us connecting to leverage the work that each other is doing just helps to create even more impact than we can on our own. And I would love, like, if any listeners, if check out the community site, like see if there's a story that resonates with you that seems helpful. If you are feeling blah, but not sure exactly where to start, like we've got, some suggestions for searches or videos. See what resonates. I mean, I really wish there were a prescriptive, like, here's what you need to do to feel amazing, but it just doesn't work that way. And unfortunately, we have to be willing I get to experiment and see what is the sort of the magical piece that helps us the most in flourishing. And so see what resonates most for you. Like, is it exercise? Is it dance, yoga, meditation? Try something. And maybe there are some listeners too who are at the point where they'd be comfortable sharing their stories on, with us. That would be incredible too.
Well, and I think I wanna really underscore that, I can say that in all the work that I do professionally and the way I'm interacting with my larger community, a piece of feedback that I hear often is that notwithstanding accomplishments in business or in life or work, that sometimes the most interesting thing about another human being is their capacity to be real and to share a story of struggle and then to give the journey of how one begins to utilize that struggle as a source for this way up. And it's just the metaphor of this way up is so impactful. And people have said, the most interesting thing about you is the struggle. It is the experience of that experience and the surrendering to that as a vehicle for breakthrough, for impact, for inspiration. And so I do want to invite listeners that if you have a story to tell, this is the space that would be both very encouraging to you individually, but it's also a space like you never know what a blessing you might be to another person when you can say, like, this is what I've been through. This is my backstory. This is what caused, this is the childhood experiences I've had. This is how trauma's informed, and the variety of stories that can be gathered and collected in the room that you have in this community. I want to just affirm for folks, it's a real invitation that Kat is giving you. So please do check it out. And again, please check the show notes for easy access to some of these resources that she's highlighting.
Yeah, and just on the storytelling point, we've talked about the power of storytelling to like fight stigma, but also just so there's data out there that storytelling is 22 times more effective than seeing the same data like in a PowerPoint presentation. And just a story to illustrate that. I was at a behavioral health conference, and a woman working in the industry heard a man speaking on stage, and it wasn't until she heard him, like, sharing his story that, like, a light bulb went off in her head, and she recognized, like, some internal trauma that she needed to deal with, and she wouldn't have gone on that journey without hearing someone else's story to help her move forward.
I love it. Well, we will have a part 2 and a 3 and a 4 because you're stuck with me and the HX Collective. So know that. I also want to say that, as we're looking ahead to continue to share resources back and forth. So once again, as we find ways to make available to our respective audiences, to continue to be united in this journey of elevating human flourishing and to destigmatize mental health and what it means to be truly well. I know there's going to be a lot to come, but on a real practical level, I always love to ask my guests to give some guidance, some a source of like concreteness of, if I'm listening right now, I feel inspired, I feel, attracted to the things that I'm hearing you talk about, Kat. I always do the 3 by 30. If there were 3 things that I could do in the next 30 days that could move me in a direction of really becoming whole and feeling in the straight in the being of well-being, what are some of the things that you would leave our listeners with to take away?
Okay, so this is the hardest question by far because I seriously have a list of about 50 things that I do. Like, and some I focus on more than others at different points in my life. And I was like, okay, I know this is coming. I'm gonna have to focus to think about three. And I'm like, oh, but I'm gonna give it a try. I have, like, for me, exercise is, I can't do it without it. Cannot. If it impacts my well-being, the way I'm thinking, brain fog, cheerfulness, joy. Exercise is a must for me. Sunlight. I'm going to combine sunlight and nature, even though they're two different things slightly, but sunlight and nature, there's so much data about how sunlight and the vitamin D can impact you and impact your joy. And there's a ton of data too about nature. Like, there are new programs like summer camps, or just get kids outside. I can't tell you exactly why, but I know that it works. It just brings, such a sense of mindfulness, which could be my third. I'll go with mindfulness. I have to say, so I started maybe about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, I started meditating every day, and it made a huge difference. And if it's not meditation, because I know some people say, you know what, that's not for me, a mindfulness practice, if there's we have a video on our website by Dr. Lisa, who says, she explains like mindfulness for beginners. And she's like, look, if you're washing the dishes, say to yourself, I'm rinsing this dish. I'm putting this dish in the dishwasher. I'm grabbing a fork. I'm rinsing the fork. I'm putting the fork in the dishwasher. It's just to, like, turn off the noise that's going on and focus on what you're doing. And seems like something very simple, but mindfulness really increases well-being. So whether that practice is meditation or just being in the moment and being present in conversations, especially with people. So I use my three broadly.
You did, but I think there's a wealth of subsets under all of them. So as folks are certainly encouraged. Other things that they should do if they wanted to get involved with this way up life, go to the website. Are there particular things that you would point them to if they're going to start the journey with you and really leveraging either the community aspects or other things? Anything else that you would want to share with our listeners today that just help them take a next step on that journey?
Yes, please. If you want to get involved or learn more, email us at hello@thiswayup.life. That would be amazing. And we'll, as you said, we'll share links to different sections of the website. Whether you feel like maybe this community part is resonating with me, and I want to hear stories. You we'll send you a link for that. And if you're thinking about maybe exploring the flourishing journey, maybe check out mindfulness like as a first step. Like look up, we've got an assortment of videos about, whether it's meditation or other mindfulness practice. That's a lovely place to start.
I love it. Well, as we wrap for today, I knew this was going to be a great conversation, and I know one setting wasn't going to get it all done, but I'm so happy that you are now on the radar of the community that is the HX Collective. And friends, I wanted to say on a personal note, it is so impactful when you step into a space of wanting to be united around something that is so much larger than yourself as an individual. And I can tell you as a part of my own personal journey, and I know Kat is nodding, she's going to agree wholeheartedly with this. Never underestimate about, being open and interested about creating an impact on the human experience as a vehicle that gives you so many gifts that you wouldn't have expected and so many new friends. I mean, at this age and stage of my life, one might say, I probably know the people that I need to know. And yet I am gobsmacked by how this journey has opened me up to an entirely new community of people that are like friends and people that are meant to be as a part of my life. So by being plugged into our community and continuing to engage with us, it's my joy and hope that you too will have that experience and you being united with us in the mission to really focus on the human experience and to elevate what it means for human flourishing. Kat Miller, you did that for us today. And I know that people will be profoundly and positively changed because of this conversation and because of the great work you're doing at This Way Up. So until next time, I wish everyone great success. Take away the exercise. We're going to do sunlight outdoor combo. And I can't wait to really pay attention to some of those mindfulness resources that you've highlighted. So thanks for being with us, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks for being here. If today's conversation sparked something in you, we hope you'll carry it forward with curiosity, compassion, and courage. Subscribe to the show, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs it. Until next time, keep exploring what it means to be fully human.